Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the What's on Your Table podcast. We're super excited to have you here today. We have another amazing guest with us. Anna Stitt is on the line. I'm so excited to go over some information with her. She is a rancher out west and's got an amazing story to tell us and a lot of good quality information about her cattle and a lot about the industry of ranching. So this is for people to tune in to learn about how your food gets on your table and why it matters what you are eating. So we're going to dive into this conversation here in a second. I wanted to just get started with a quick story, and this is going to be something we're gonna dive into in the beginning of the podcast here, of a question that I'm going to pass over to Anna, and then we'll get to know her. But we're going to start off with our introduction with her with this story of what is your craziest experience with an animal. So I had a crazy experience this morning where I had our pigs. We have pastured pigs that we have out in the woods, and I thought it was a great idea to use electric fence to separate them, and it's been working great, and normally the pigs respect it. But this morning I had a little incident where one of our pigs broke through the electric fence trying to get through the feed, got the fence stuck on its face, and I had to go running across the pasture, turn off the fence, untangle the pig, and I turned around from doing that, and all the other pigs are in the feed bucket, and I had to pull them out of it, and one pig's whole face was just caked in feed because it just nosedived into the 5 gallon bucket and started eating all the feed. So that was my crazy story of the day. But Anna, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and let's get started with that. What's your craziest animal story that we can that you've had an experience with?
Hey, Chance, I love that. I love pigs and just their different personalities. I can envision your little pig with his head in the bucket.
Yeah.
Um, so my craziest animal story, that's a tough one. I've got like several different stories popping into my mind right now, but maybe the one I would share is I ride my horse a lot. So horseback in a lot of different settings, whether it's moving cows or checking cows, whatever that might be. One time we were up on the mountain moving cows. It was my mom and I. We were horseback, and gosh, our horses started acting a little bit funny. And we looked behind us, and there was a sandhill crane like running on the ground, flapping its wings, chasing us. And
Oh my
it
goodness.
was just like one of the funniest, most bizarre things that has ever happened. Because, of course, a horse probably hasn't had a sandhill crane chase them before. So it got everybody's blood pumping.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. We see cranes around here all the time, but I've never seen them chase a horse. That's a funny one
Yeah.
to think about. Awesome, Anna.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that story. Let's dive into your background a little bit and kind of hear a little bit about where you come from, what you're up to now, and we'll let everyone know that.
Awesome. Yeah, I grew up in Western Montana and on our family ranch. My grandparents started this ranch, and it's where I grew up with my family. I've got a couple of siblings, and my folks and I grew up along with my grandparents here. And I loved it. I've always loved ranching. I fell in love with animals from an early age. I was always involved on the ranch, and my mom, I don't really remember this, but my mom says that from the time I was 3 years old, I was driving the feed truck. So she would just put it in gear for me and I would just steer it. I mean, you're in a big open field, so not much can go wrong, I
Yeah.
guess. And she'd feed the hay off the back. So I've been involved in it from every stage of animal care and um, land maintenance and stewardship. And I just like it pulls at my heartstrings. I love agriculture and being on the ranch. I left the ranch for college. I'm an accountant, a CPA. So between going to college and then pursuing a career in accounting, I was gone from the ranch for about 13 years. And I worked in public accounting. Actually got to work with farmers and ranchers while I was in public accounting. And that was really awesome to stay connected to the agriculture industry. But a couple years ago, I moved back to the ranch, and I didn't realize how much I missed it until I got back here. So I have been so happy to be back on the ranch and with my family and connected back to the land and the livestock, which is what really makes my heart happy.
That's awesome. And what are you doing back home on the ranch right now? What kind of operation is it looking like? What kind of things are you raising that? What's that kind of stuff looking like?
Yeah, so I do still have a day job. I'm still a CPA. I work from home for my what I quote unquote I call my real job.
Mm-hmm.
So my typical day is I get up in the mornings, I go out and I do chores. Right now we're still feeding cows. We have a cow calf operation. We just finished our calving season. We usually start calving about the 1st of April, and it went really, really good this year. The weather was good for us. We had just good luck all the way around. So that was great. So, anyways, I feed cows in the morning and then I come and do my real job. And then I'll run outside over lunchtime and do chores, usually something horse related that I do over lunchtime. And then in the evenings, I'm going back out and doing ranch stuff. Right now, the biggest thing is irrigating.
Okay.
Um, yeah, we flood irrigate our whole ranch, which is really fun. It kind of brings the little kid side of you out playing, setting a dam in a
Okay.
ditch and
So,
playing in
so
the
I'm
water.
from Missouri. We got or out here, we got more rain than we can handle right now. So it just keeps coming. So we don't do a lot of irrigation. So, and maybe
Oh,
people listening don't know much about irrigation. And this is a big thing with the droughts out west. What is flood irrigation? How does that work? Could you explain for us?
yeah, totally. So, um, we'll envision your yard, right? If you don't water your yard, it's going to turn brown. And in order to keep green grass in our fields, just like your yard, we have to irrigate it. For us, we flood irrigate. So we have different ditches that run through the fields, and we set a dam, which it's just a tarp. It's like a big tarp that you put in the ditch, and it kicks the water over the ditch that flows out into the field. And you'll cover the field with a couple inches of water, or depending on where, maybe more. And then yeah, it soaks into the ground and does the irrigation that way.
Got you. So
Works
is
really
this
good
like
for
a
us.
stream? Is this a stream coming by your property that you're using, or where's the water coming from?
Yeah, so most of our water comes either from a creek that kind of feeds the bulk of the irrigation through this whole valley. It's a bigger creek, not quite a river, but a good sized creek. And
Mhm.
then there's also little mountain streams that come out of the mountains and flow all the way down here to the ranch. And we use those for irrigation as well.
Awesome. I'll try to add some pictures into this, but could you let people know where they can search? Where are you from? Because they got to see the
Oh,
views. And when
yeah.
you say a valley, like it's not just like when I say a valley out here, it's like two little hills. Your valley's a real valley. So could you give everyone kind of the where are you at and what do they need to Google to see the pictures of what you're talking about here with a what a valley looks like where you're from?
Yeah, totally. So we live in Helmville, Montana. It's kind of Midwestern side of the state. And Helmville is just like the most beautiful country, in my opinion. Of course, I'm biased, but yeah, we live right smack in a valley. So either side of my house, I have mountains, and our ranch is all in the bottom ground. So pastures in the valley. It's really cool.
So,
If you check my,
go for
oh,
it.
go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say I try to post pictures on like my Instagram, and I do have some different irrigating pictures out there. If you
Okay.
kind of want a visual of what that flood irrigating looks like
Okay.
for
You want to
us.
give everyone your Instagram real quick and we'll tag it down below
Oh,
as well.
oh yeah. I always laugh when I say this out loud. It's Beauty and the Beef LLC.
All right.
So yeah, Beauty and the Beef LLC, all one word.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so go look that up so you can see these pictures. So, getting back into the irrigation, that's an interesting topic because I've been hearing a lot of stuff about the irrigation. Can you explain to people what happens if you didn't irrigate? What if you were, what if you couldn't irrigate at all? What happens to your pasture? What happens to your farm? What happens to your operation?
Yeah, for sure. For us, like we heavily rely on irrigating because we don't get a ton of rainfall here. We definitely need that supplemental irrigation water to hit our fields, not only for our pastures that the cows graze on, but also our hay fields. So we raise all of our own hay that we feed to the cows through the winter. And like, I mean, if we just didn't have water on it, you wouldn't have enough of a hay crop. So you've got to have the water to grow the
So
hay to feed the cows.
okay, so let's dive a little deeper into that for someone who's new to this. So what with the hay, why is that so important? So explain kind of what your hay process looks like. Why do you have to grow your own hay? What's the point of that? And
Yeah.
what happens if you ran out of hay? What would you have to do for as a farmer?
Yeah. Good question. So in this part of Montana, our winters are like 6 months long.
Mhm.
Uh, really typically 6 months long, and we get a lot of snow. So the cows can't graze through a lot of the winter months because we get so much snow. Honestly, a couple winters ago, our snow was over the fences. So
Wow.
we had so much snow, it was over the fence. And this sounds so crazy, but what we had to do was we took our our dozer, and we plowed along the fence lines so that the cows couldn't just walk over the fences. You know what I mean?
That's crazy. That's
It
crazy.
was,
So that's a problem. I got normal fences and no snow that tall, and I've had my animals get out occasionally, and I know that's a common thing for farmers that we have to deal with. What do you do with the cattle when the snow's over the fence? What do you do with them?
yeah, it was the craziest thing. But yeah, you had to plow along the fence line so that they couldn't walk over the fences. And then we had to plow paths through the field for them so that they could have, a comfortable place to eat, to walk, to get to
Man,
water.
most people are thinking about plowing out a driveway or a parking lot. You got to plow out your pasture so your cows can lay down somewhere. That's crazy. So
Yeah.
sorry, I got distracted when you start saying that much snow. That's insane to just imagine. So
Right.
going back to the hay. So why do we need the hay? And if there's that much snow or even any amount of snow on the ground, what makes that hay so important for your operation?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so if we've got so much snow that the cows can't graze, we feed them we feed them cows. We feed them hay every single day. And when we can put our own hay up, it's a lot more cost effective to put our own hay up rather than try to buy hay on the market. So yeah, when we grow our own hay, we're looking at the nutrient content of it because, that'll be the cow's sole forage that they eat through the winter. So it's really important that they have enough protein and fiber and nutrients within that hay to, will not only thrive through the winter, but they're also pregnant through the winter months. So they need the right nutrition to grow their babies all at the same time.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. So with the hay, let's go very basic with this because this is something I struggled with as a new rancher. I'll admit it. This was a struggle of mine. What's the difference between hay and straw? Because I got told there's a massive difference, and obviously I learned there is. But for everyone listening, could you explain the difference between hay and straw for everybody?
Yeah, totally. So hay is like it's grass. Usually like a Timothy grass. There's alfalfa hay as well. Alfalfa has a higher protein content. But what straw is it's oats, right? So oats grow up, I don't know how tall, let's just say a couple feet tall.
Mhm.
And they usually go and harvest the oat, the actual like grain off of the top of the plant, and then the straw is all just the stem of that plant.
Mhm.
And there isn't the same nutrient content in straw. So a lot of people will use straw for bedding, like in your barns you can put straw out, in your calving barns or things like that. And cows, yeah, they'll totally munch on it, but it doesn't have enough nutrients in straw to support cattle.
Yeah.
It can maybe be a filler to help like add in with hay or other grain mixtures, but straw itself, it isn't going to be enough to keep a cow with full of the nutrients that they need.
Definitely. Yeah. So just diving in a little deeper to that, because you got my interest peaked. When you talk about grass and you said that the nutrition of your hay matters, and then you said grass is hay. How does grass equal nutrition? So how does that work? How can you control the nutrition of your grass? What do you do on your farm to up that nutrition? Explain that for us, because that's something I think a lot of people don't understand. They just think hay is hay.
Yeah, totally. For us, we personally like to do things as naturally as we can. So we don't use like a chemical fertilizer on our hay fields. Rather, we use our own cow manure to fertilize the fields. So in the springtime, like in our corrals, we'll clean the poop out of our corrals and we'll
Mhm.
spray in our hay meadows. And we also feed our cows in the wintertime in our hay meadow. So they're like naturally pooping on the hay meadow, which is a fabulous fertilizer. And then, in the springtime, we make sure that it's spread evenly over the field to get a nice, good application across the field. But as far as nutrients go, I mean, like I mentioned before, alfalfa is going to be a higher protein hay for you, and we do grow alfalfa in addition to a wild grass hay, which for us in this part of the world, it's mostly Timothy grass that is in our grass hay. And yeah, we kind of pair the cow's nutrient needs at certain gestation times. So right, like a mama cow needs more nutrients at certain periods of her pregnancy. So we'll make sure to give her alfalfa when she needs more protein to supplement herself and her baby that she's growing. So it's just a matter of knowing what nutrients are within your hay and pairing it up with the cow's needs.
Awesome. And one thing too that you've been talking about, and you said you have a cow calf operation. For someone who's new to even understanding ranching or hearing that term, could you explain that term for everybody so they know what do you mean when you say you have a cow calf operation, and what is your goal as a cow calf farmer, rancher?
Yeah, totally. So we have a herd of mama cows and they have babies each year and we keep their babies. And for us, we're raising the babies up until they're butcher ready and then being able to butcher them and sell them direct to consumers. So that's the cow calf part we
How
do,
long does that take to raise them up ready for consumers?
Well, for us, our goal is 18 to 20 months.
Okay.
So they're just shy of 2 years old when they should be ready to butcher. Sometimes it might be a little closer to that 2 year mark, but a goal of 18 to 20 months.
All right, perfect. And for those of you listening, that's one of the reasons why beef holds a premium price is because of that time. And if you look at chickens, chickens can be raised out in 8 to 9 weeks. Hogs and pork can be raised out in 6 to 7 months, maybe 9 months if you go longer. But to even get in the realm of ready to finish a beef animal, you have to have it at least 18 to 20 months. You just heard her say. So that's something that I want everyone listening to understand, that that's built into the price. When you understand why does certain meats cost different prices, it's because of the time and the effort that amazing ranchers like Anna and her family, they're taking on these animals. So I just want to make sure that's known and understood, because I think that's a very important thing for everyone to understand. So sorry, I just wanted to hop in there with that because I thought that was very interesting. So when it comes to your cow calf operation, you said you have a batch of mamas, a herd of mamas, and their goal is to have their baby. And then what are you doing with the other animals?
Yeah. So the baby calves, they'll stay on their mom for, well, right now it's close to 6 to 8 months, but I'd like to actually push that out to 10 months. I think that it just helps the baby develop a little bit more before they go out on their own. So yeah, we just raise the calves. They all get to stay out in the pasture. So they've got big, beautiful, like green pastures that they roam in all summer long. And um, I think for us, that's part of the beauty of how we finish our cattle, is letting them be pasture raised, where they have clean water, great feed, big wide open spaces that they get to live their life in. And when it gets a little closer to butcher time for, those 18 to 20-month-old cattle, we will start increasing their feed probably like 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks before butcher, to make sure that they're in prime condition to send to the butcher.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So when you say feed, what kind of things are you feeding at the end there to help them get ready for the butcher?
So they're always on grass, whether it's, actual grass in the summer or hay in the winter time. They're always on that. They can have as much as they like of the grass or the hay. And for us, we do start supplementing them with grain in the last maybe 6 weeks of their life. And we don't do a ton, because for us, when we're finishing cattle, it's really important that they have the ability to like mature naturally. And when you get your steak that comes out of the package, you're cooking your steak, of course you want to have a really nice size of the actual meat.
Mm-hmm.
And meat, muscle, and muscle, it just has to naturally develop with time. So for us, that's why we don't try to butcher them any younger than we do, because we want them to naturally mature and finish to their prime. So we do supplement with the grain because that helps with the marbling. And marbling in cattle, like that, hugely impacts the flavor of the steak and the tenderness of the steak and like the juiciness of the steak. I mean, we've all bit into a steak that is just mind-blowingly good.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has to do with the marbling within the muscle. So for us, I mean, my personal preference, I love having a little bit of that marbling in there.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, I mean, there's just such a huge reward in the eating experience of a cow that's been finished properly.
Mm-hmm.
And
So explain that. I'll kind of lead into this a little bit for people who don't know. So when you're saying finished, this is something that I think is interesting for people to understand, because that's where a lot of people, they see on the packages grass finish, grain finish. You might see all different types of things. People might hear that cattle are finished in a feedlot, all these type of things with that word finish. Then to kind of break that down, like Anna said, her business is she has a cow calf operation. That is the mom who has the baby, and then the babies are going to either turn into moms or are going to turn into breeders if they're male, or they're going to turn into steak. Like that's the process of the meat industry. And there's the on the mom phase, and then you wean the calf, and that's when it's surviving only on grass. And then it has the whole growing stage, and this is where grazing practices come into place. And I'm going to ask you about your guys' grazing practices here in a little bit, but you raise them and they get to that maturity age, and then they switch from that pasture to finishing stage. Could you elaborate on the finishing stage, and maybe even just, I threw out a couple examples, if you know any more details on the different types of finishing, just so people can understand? Because I think one thing that does us a disservice on in the grocery store is the label, because like the label is just there to market to us. And I would definitely like people to know a little bit of more information behind just the words on the label.
yeah, for sure. And I always think like labelings can be confusing and also deceiving, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, read the fine print. There's always a little catch there that you didn't know. So in my opinion, I don't put a ton of weight on the labeling, right? Because for example, even a grass finished product can technically have grain in it. So there's just a lot of little caveats there that if you dive into the details, you'll learn more and probably be surprised at some of the things that you find out. But anyways, the finishing product it's like, that's when you're getting it ready to be in its best condition to go to butcher. And of course, like one of the things that you judge if they're ready and finished on is their weight. But also, again, I kind of touched on it a little bit of like letting them naturally mature to their size. Like you don't want them just hog fat, because when you actually go to butcher that carcass up, you don't want just unruly amounts of fat. You want meat.
Mm-hmm.
So you let the meat actually develop on the animal. And yeah, you want fat too, because that's part of a healthy and nutritious cow. They need fat to survive. It impacts their metabolism and how they grow as an animal. So fat is important too, but it's really important that you don't have a lot of waste on that carcass by just unruly amounts of fat that you have to trim off through the actual meat cutting process. So yeah, there are different ways to do it. There are some cattle that are finished just on grain in kind of a feedlot style. There are some cattle that are truly finished on grass. And those ones, they typically need even more time to finish. Those are probably, I would say, anywhere from 26 to 30 months old when they're grass finished. So that's an even longer period of time to get them ready for butcher via grass. And then the way that we do it, like I say, they're pasture raised, they're always on grass forage, and then they're just supplemented with some grain.
Got you. And just kind of explaining for everybody the difference between those three in a very simple way. Feedlot, the problem with a feedlot, normally they don't have grass. Now, some feedlots do have grass and they do good rotational practices, but a lot of the feedlots you see in the bad pictures on the internet, they'll have no grass and it'll just be a solid mud pit and it'll just be cows and they just fed grain by a ration. Then grass finished is 100% only grass. So they're only on grass, they're only on pasture. They don't get grain normally. And that's where you don't want to just trust the label, because like Anna was saying, if you do feed them on grain, technically, if it's on the ground, it's still grass. So that's something you want to look into the rules. But the idea of most local farmers are going to have, when they say grass finished, they're going to mean it's going to go all their life on grass and never see grain. And then there's the hybrid model, like what you guys run. And that is, like you're saying, they're on pasture every single day of their life where they have access to hay, but then they get snacks. Essentially, they get a little boost, they get a little meal here and there of grain. Because if you guys have never watched cows, this is something, I'm newer into the cattle industry. I'm mind blown. I thought I ate a lot, but cows eat all day long. Like if you let them, if they're not hanging out in the shade, catching their breath and chewing their cud, they're going to be out there eating grass all day long. So that's that's kind of how you can see those three models. Now, something that I wanted to talk about, because one of the things in this industry is butchering. It's the process that nobody likes to talk about, but it has to happen. Like the animal can't go from the pasture to our plates without going through a butcher. And one thing I want to talk about a butcher is, you told me when we talked before that your grandma used to run a butcher shop. So I would love to hear kind of what was the time period like then, a couple stories, maybe your grandma's butcher shop, and then we can get into a little bit more talking about how butchers and how butchering process works today. But let's hear a little bit about your grandma, because this sounds awesome.
Yeah, for sure. It actually was my great grandma.
Great
So
grandma.
yeah, I never met her. I wish I would have. It's one of those things that you always wish you could have like firsthand experienced our ancestors' ways of life. But it was, my great grandpa was a butcher and he ran a meat shop. And he passed away at an early age, I think from lung cancer. So he passed away early, and then his wife, which was my great grandma, had to take over and run the meat shop. And I was trying to figure out like how many years she ran it and what it looked like for her, struggles that she had to go through and overcome. But unfortunately, like, we just didn't do a good job of preserving
Well,
that family history
about
over the.
what time period was this though? Just curious.
I, that probably would have been in the 40s and 50s,
Okay.
and I have gone back to the 30s as well, but I'd say 40s and 50s for sure.
Got you. Yeah, that's super interesting. So now today, there's a lot of different butchering options that we can use as ranchers. I'd like to know maybe a little bit about kind of your process when it comes to butchering and how you guys handle that.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so I just said my great grandpa and my great grandma were involved in meat cutting. So was my great uncle and my grandpa. And of course, I actually do have the honor of remembering my grandpa. And grandpa taught my dad, my family, and I a lot about butchering. And this is like, it is an art. There is so much involved in butchering. There's so many things that you need to know. Not only about like the front end of finishing a cow ready for butcher and then the actual slaughter process and then the meat cutting process. There's just a ton of information within that process. So for us, I actually have a little meat shop in my basement that we use for our own meat. That's only like meat that our family personally eats,
Hmm.
but it's cool for us to be able to do that. And so then I get to actually see the carcass. I get to see what the fat layer looks like. I get to see what the marbling in the meat looks like. I get to, understand the different cuts of the animal and see how it's cut up and how it's packaged and then eat it myself. And that's really important
Yeah.
to
Can we break that down for a second? Because you said so much there. And I really want to, if you could give nuggets for those, just little bite-sized pieces of information for people who are listening that might totally be brand new to the idea of this, because you did talk about something that's so true. Butchering is an art, and it is an art and a process that we take for granted. And it's something that, when done right, can add a lot of value. So one thing you said you look at the carcass. For those of you guys who don't know, the carcass is when the animal has, it's just laying there with meat and bones. Essentially, that's the carcass. When you're looking at that, and that is the meat, you said a couple things that you're looking at, but why are you looking at the marbling, and what are you looking for? And what other things and tips would you say to somebody if they are looking at their meat? What kind of things could they be looking for to be more educated when they're looking at a cut of meat, and not just looking at the price tag or the labeling sticker, actually looking at the product and the steak or whatever the meat is itself? What could they learn from that?
Yeah, totally. So some of the things that I look for are what color is the fat? I personally think that the fat is where a lot of the flavor comes from in the meat. So the fat matters, right? The fat's really important.
What
And
color are you looking for?
I like it kind of on the whiter side.
Okay.
Um, it's not stark white, but maybe like a creamy white color. It's not yellow because some is yellow, but I personally like that creamy white color. And then the marbling. So, like if you're looking at a steak, the meat part of the steak, look to see if there's little specks of white within the muscle. That's called the marbling.
Okay.
And that again, that adds the tenderness to the steak and the flavor and the juiciness. So the marbling is really important for how your eating experience is going to go.
Hmm. Awesome. Perfect. Yeah, those are two things to definitely look at and make sure you guys understand when you're looking at that. So you said you do your all your own meat in your own in your own basement, which is amazing. We butcher our own venison, and we're actually looking to do our first hog this year, but the the cow, and it's just so big. That's my only problem. Like, how am I gonna hang this thing? But I definitely respect that. So going into, because you do sell to consumers as well, how do you go for that process? What does that look like for the average person when they're going to buy their meat? What kind of butcher are they going through? And actually, why can't, because I think I know the answer, but I want you to explain the answer. Why can't you just sell it to them out of your basement? Let's start with that question.
Yes, love it. Uh, there are health standards when it comes to selling meat direct to consumer, because when you're selling direct to a consumer, you have to be able to ensure that it was humanely slaughtered and butchered to certain specifications. So you know you're getting clean, healthy, good to eat meat. Um, so that's where the butchers come in. And for us, for all the meat that we sell direct to consumers, we have it go through a butcher that is both state and federally inspected. So they're held to really high standards of how that all happens within their meat shop. And then they have staff of like highly trained professionals in meat cutting. And that's so important when they're cutting up your steak. I mean, you don't want to cut into your steak and find a huge tendon running through it that is like super tough and you can't chew through, right? So like the importance of what your butcher does is incredible. And we said it before, but I'll say it again. It's an art. That is like a highly skilled talent to really properly cut an animal up.
Yeah.
So
How far do you have to travel to get to your butcher?
it's 2.5 hours for us to get.
Hours one way.
Yeah, I was there yesterday and it was so fun, Chance. Yesterday they gave me a tour, so I got to see their whole facility, and they told me all about the process from when I drop the beef off to the time I pick the packages of meat up. So I got to see everything, and that's good education for me, but also just what a nice opportunity for us to have a conversation while they were showing me everything. And then they also did a taste testing for me, because our butcher, they do a lot of specialty meats. So they make brats and sausages and snack sticks and salamis. So that was really fun to do that. They also smoke all of their own bacon and hams, and they do a really good smoking process. So we had a ton of fun yesterday, but it is 2.5 hours one way to get there. And for dang sure in the winter months, you have to go through kind of a canyon that is pretty slick in the winter months. So slow and steady wins the race.
Well, that's crazy. And that's something I don't think a lot of people understand. And it's something that's kind of been in the news here and there about how we need more local butchers and how we need to get those smaller butchers. But for someone like you, every time you're going to drop that off the animal, it's 2.5 hours one way. That's 5 hours of your day. That's an entire day. That's something I think people need to understand in that process. Now, another thing I'd like to touch on, you said you got a tour of the entire place and they showed you the entire process. Did you get to watch your animals go there start to finish, and in like 2 hours the animal is done and you just loaded it in your cooler and took it home, or does it take longer than that?
Oh, it takes so much longer than that.
I know that was a joke for everyone listening. I knew the answer, but yeah. So can you please explain that process for somebody? Because I think that's sometimes how people see it. It's like, oh yeah, you drive 2.5 hours, you drop it off, and you wait around for an hour like you're getting an oil change, and you take the meat home. It doesn't quite work like that. Could you explain that process for people?
Yes, totally. So a couple things. I know this is super delicate, but I feel like it's really important that we have an understanding of it. I am like a giant animal lover. I love my cows. So it is really important to me that they have a humane death. And part of that is for me understanding how that happens at our butcher and feeling really comfortable with that process. So I bring the cow the day before it is going to be slaughtered. And the reason that you do that is so that they have time to get used to the new pen that you put them in, and they're calm and they're happy, right? Like if you don't want to slaughter a cow if they're all worked up, that does indeed impact the quality of the meat that you take home with you. So it's really important that they have the chance to kind of adjust to the new place that you drop them off at and get calm and happy. And very important that it's a humane butchering. And they do the way that they do it. It's like, I don't know how to say this again. I know it's a delicate topic, but it's over before they know it's happening. And it's as peaceful and as humane as you could hope for it to be. And that's how it starts on the day that they're being processed. And then so after that, of course, they have to be skinned and gutted, and then the carcass is hung in the cooler, And usually they dry age. Everybody has a little different process on the dry aging, but they can dry age for up to 21 days in the cooler. And
That's another term I think we see places, dry age. Could you break down why do they do that?
yeah, I think like I'm not super educated in this part of it, but I think it can impact the texture of the meat, if it's, and when they dry age it, it's in a very specific temperature room with a very specific humidity
Mhm.
in that room. And I think what they're trying to do is to lower the water content within the carcass, which could maybe impact the texture. And um, I think that's the goal of it.
Yeah,
Do you
definitely.
know anything about dry aging to
Yeah,
add?
that's just with that, and I know they do it for the tenderness, and I know some people some people claim the longer you go, the better it is. I've seen some things in the wild game where people do it their own, like for 3 months. I'm like, that's getting intense. But definitely I know that's the purpose for it. So what's it look like after that then? So they hang the carcass, they dry age it, and then what's that look like between that? Because you said that's anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, and
Yeah.
then what happens after that?
And then they actually cut it up. And like these butchers, they have the right setup. So
Mhm.
they can do way faster than I can do it in my basement for our own meat. But yeah, they have all the right tools. They have the right knives, the right um carts and pulley systems so they can move the heavy that I mean carcasses are really heavy.
Mhm.
Um but it's still I don't know how long it would take them to cut one up. It takes probably at least a few hours to go through the cutting process because they cut to my specifications. I tell them exactly what cuts I want out of that carcass.
Mhm.
So they look at that and say, okay, is it bone in or bone out for this cut? Um, and then once they have that, then it goes into the packaging part of the process. And then they have to look at my cut sheet again and see, okay, is it 2 steaks per package, 1 pound of ground beef per package, or 2 pounds? And so that's a big part of the process as well as the actual packaging and labeling. It's like super time consuming. And again, it is an art. And I am so appreciative of these talented butchers out there.
Definitely. So, just to give people that overall view, what do you think is the average from drop off to the time you pick up? Normally, how long does that take?
At least 3 weeks.
At least 3 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's something huge to understand because again, that's part of the process and it takes time. And like you said, it's not a process a lot of people want to talk about. I think it's good to have the conversation though, because there is the right way and the wrong way to do it. And there's so many people working so hard to do it the right way that the thing that I hear the most from farmers is that we want them to have the best, all our animals have the best life possible in one bad day, and that's
Yeah.
that's the process we're all going for. So that's definitely interesting, but getting away from that, I want to talk about just a little bit on kind of where you see the future of agriculture going, because and even to get in a little deeper into the future agriculture, I want to talk about local sustainable agriculture, because this is a term that we're starting to hear tossed around. It's something that I totally believe in. I think you need to go find your local CSA to get your vegetables. I think you need to go find your local farmer to get your meat. I think you need to go find the person with the chickens out back that got too many chickens and got a couple extra eggs. We recently started getting our milk from a local dairy where it's raw milk, and that's been amazing. And so where do you see that going, especially in the post-COVID era where people are kind of more awake to it matters that my food doesn't come from, across the world. It's just coming from either across the country or hopefully across your backyard.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. Well, I mean, everybody wants to know where their food comes from. And what a life changing experience for people that have maybe never been to a ranch before, that can now have a personal relationship with their rancher, and they get to actually feel connected to the whole process of raising that animal to go to butcher, and like the educational opportunity, but also it's really thrilling for people that haven't been able to see this before to now have a personal relationship with their rancher and follow along from day one to, like you say, the one bad day.
Right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
huge.
And I think seeing that process, kind of like we were talking about a little earlier about how you can't trust the label all the time, and there might be the fine print in
Yeah,
there, the seeing the process and knowing your farmer and being able to have those conversations. Like, I know you're probably like me. If a customer calls up, you'll talk to them on the phone, you'll answer their questions, you'll go through that process with them. And I think that's such a game changer, and that's something that I'd like to, again, just have you kind of talk on a little more on that, understanding that relationship and what kind of value does having a local rancher provide to a consumer, compared to just going to the grocery store and picking up whatever random piece of meat's on sale this week.
yeah, totally. It's invaluable. That's the kind of value it has, is invaluable to have that. Because I mean, if you're gonna buy a product that you feed to your family, you want to feel really confident that it's raised the way that aligns with your personal values, that it's butchered in the way that you feel good about, but also that you know where it comes from, that you know the quality that it is, you know that it's going to be a healthy meat to feed to your family. That's invaluable. And like any question that you think of along the way, knowing that you can call your rancher up and talk to them about it and broaden your knowledge about agriculture in general, like that's huge because ranchers feed the world. That's what we do. Farmers and ranchers feed the world. And that's important to everybody, right? Like
Well, and
whether they've realized or not, it is important to everybody. So you kind of asked, like, what's the future of ag? I think this is a huge movement chance of where more and more people are interested in buying local, understanding where it comes from. There's a lot of young ranchers that, or, young people that want to get into ranching. And I think like that's a momentum that I want to jump on board with
mhm.
because it's meaningful. That's how you make steps to change the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, with what you were saying there about the having that, we do feed the world as ranchers, but if we can get rid of that middleman, and especially for the consumer to understand that they can create that relationship, not only can the rancher, support and feed the world, but you as a consumer can make sure your freezer's always stocked no matter what. And I think that's something that is definitely, like you're saying, with this movement changing. And you talked about something there that I kind of want to wrap this up with, and then I'll see if you got any other things you want to talk on before we end the podcast here. But the talking about your career that you have outside of the ranch, you said you work in the financial industry as an accountant, correct, in the ag world?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. So you said that the future that you see is a lot of young ranchers. I'm 26 years old. I got a brand new family, and that's my goal. I want to have a big ranch. I want to have something that I can hand down to my daughter, and that she can take over one day if she wants, or maybe she wants to make our videos for TikTok. I don't know, whatever the TikTok is of the day. But one of those things where you can create something in ranching. And one thing I think the consumers might not totally understand, and you might have a good lens into this, is the cost of entry to get in for ranchers. And what are some of the hurdles that you see for new ranchers that are young ranchers that are like that they're having from that financial area?
Yeah, totally. If you weren't born into ranching where like your family can hand land down to you to ranch on, it is through the roof expensive to buy ag land. It's almost impossible, or at least it feels impossible for a young rancher to buy land to start ranching on. So there are for sure programs that can help from the financial side of it, and that's great. But like my big hope is that there'll be enough people out there in the world that understand the importance of agriculture and want to see ag land stay in ag production. In other words, like if you own a piece of land, that could be used for agriculture. Maybe if it's really important to that person that it stay in agriculture, that they'd be willing to work with that young rancher trying to buy land. And it might take longer to do it because they probably don't have, they can't just put a cash offer in and be done
Right.
the next. So if they have the willingness to work with that young rancher to keep it in ag, even if somebody comes in and says, I could buy it today, but they probably won't keep it in ag use. They might be subdividing and going a different direction with that land. So there's just like a huge trend of that happening right now, where it just makes the barrier to entry for young ranchers harder and harder and harder to get into.
Yeah. That's
And that,
that's something that I'm seeing personally as I start, because I'm first generation. I haven't had anyone hand me no land or anything. And it's looking at that. And that's one thing where I really hope that and pray that customers will see that. If you are the type of person listening to this right now where you're like, I want to support local agriculture. I want to keep the farms around. I want to be able to keep small American ranchers alive. That's where being customers, buying the product and helping support allows us to scale, us to buy and actually create a legacy with the ranch. And I think that's something that's important for consumers to understand, because a lot of people say like, oh, there's fields everywhere. It's like, yeah, fields that either somebody already owns, or if they're going to sell it, it's going at a premium. So
yeah,
it's one of those things. I think that's important for the consumers to know and understand, that when you're supporting local ranchers, you're not only helping them put food on their table literally and pay their bills, but you are also helping them purchase the land and be able to put in a fair fight when it comes to that. Any comments on that?
yeah, absolutely. And I would just add to that that ranchers are the greatest stewards of the land. Like, we have to take care of the land in order to grow the hay to feed the cows to make this whole thing work. So, like, ranchers are very environmentally conscious. Like one of our biggest goals is to take good care of the land so it can be productive for feeding the world.
Right.
And 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 I just hope that everybody knows that ranchers, one of our biggest calling as a rancher is to be a land steward.
Hmm.
It that land better than it is now for the next generation.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And that's one thing. And I said this earlier in the podcast, and I'm glad it just popped back in my mind. We talked about grazing practices, and this will be the for real last question. But we talked about grazing practices earlier. And that's something, when it comes to the environment, when it comes to healing the land, the way that you graze your cattle matter. That's just a blanket statement that I think everyone can now agree with. Could you talk a little bit about your grazing practices and why you graze the way you do, and how that helps heal your land and helps heal your environment?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So soil health is crucial. And I'm definitely not a scientist. I don't know as much as I'd like to, but certainly part of soil health is like, if you take a shovel and dig a little piece of soil up and you look at it, you want to see a lot of little things crawling in it.
Hmm.
And there's only so much that your naked eye can see. So like, if you had it under a microscope, you'd hope to see millions of little things crawling in that soil. The little organisms are what creates great soil health. But as far as grazing practices, we're always rotating our cattle so that the grass has rest periods, so that the grass can replenish. I mean, it's just like having that rest period to grow the grass back up to a certain length is really important, so that it doesn't get sheared down to the ground and then it can't support itself. Like, it takes a lot of energy to regrow from nothing.
Yeah, the best thing I've heard with that is that I've heard them call that they're solar collectors. The grass blades are solar collectors, and when the cows graze that all the way down, there's no solar collector up top, and the grass can't grow. So
Yeah.
could you just touch a little deeper on that and just kind of go into with the resting period? What's the alternative if you didn't rotate them and you didn't move them around and leave the grass behind them to grow? What would the alternative be?
Well, it'd be that you totally eat your pastures down and they can't regrow. I mean, they
Mhm.
will eventually, but they can't quickly replenish themselves.
Yeah.
So then if you run feed, then you can't feed your cows.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, is there anything else that we forgot to talk about today that you'd like to tell everybody before we hop off?
Oh, I don't think so. I
Awesome.
think you
I think you gave us a lot of great information. I really appreciate everything that you passed on, and I know that everyone listening is going to learn a lot from this podcast. What are your? I know we kind of mentioned it a little earlier, but what are your social medias, website? How can people follow you? How can they find you online?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I do Instagram the most. I have Instagram and Facebook. I just started a TikTok. Never
Okay.
thought I'm on the TikTok now. And it's at Beauty and the Beef LLC. So then, and you can get to all of my other stuff through those social medias.
Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I hope everyone listening had enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Hopefully, you learned a lot. And hopefully, the next time you go to grab that next piece of meat out of your freezer, you know where it came from. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Chance.
The What's on Your Table podcast is brought to you by Ganem Ranch, whose mission it is to provide your family with nutritionally dense pasture-raised meat shipped right to your door. Head over to ganemranch.net to learn more about how they raise their beef and to enter to win a free pack of steaks shipped right to your door.